Welcome to Ed Leader with your host, Dr. Rob Jackson. Join Dr. Jackson for conversations and reflections on improving educational leadership from the classroom to the boardroom and beyond. Educational leadership is an ever-evolving opportunity to make a real and lasting difference in the lives of students, parents, and the community. And now, here's your host, Dr. Rob Jackson.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Ed Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Jackson, and I want to thank you for spending time with me today. Children who were born from 1901 to 1927 would become known as the greatest generation. Theirs was an era marked by war and economic depression. They would endure the Spanish flu pandemic from 1918 to 1920, and yet through all of the challenges and adversity, they developed values of personal responsibility, duty, honor, and faith. These characteristics helped them to defeat Hitler, build the American economy, make incredible advances in science, and implement visionary programs like Medicare. At every stage of their lives, they were part of historic challenges and achievements of a magnitude the world has never before witnessed. The students in our schools were born 100 years after the greatest generation and have arguably endured similar challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Iraq, and the global ramifications of the current war in Ukraine have shaped their young lives just as it did their forebears a century ago. Are we witnessing the return of the greatest generation? Will the students of today lead us forward into a golden age? As we begin to move through what we hope is the final stages of this pandemic, we have an incredible opportunity to ask of ourselves, what have we learned? What is now possible? Speaking of what is now possible, let's get to it. Today's guest began his career in education serving for 8 years as a high school English teacher. After 4 years as a high school assistant principal, he served for 3 years as an elementary school principal. As a program thought leader, I first spent time with our guest when he was a member of the North Carolina Aspiring Superintendents Program, where he was selected for the Dr. Sam Houston Leadership Award. I discovered in him an incredibly thoughtful and reflective ed leader. Following 6 years in central services, he was named as the superintendent of the Henderson County Public Schools system in December 2020. He attended Elon University, where he graduated with a Bachelor's of English. He earned a Master's of School Administration at Gardner-Webb University and earned a Doctorate of Education in Educational Leadership from Western Carolina University. Please help me welcome a tremendous champion for students and teachers, Dr. John Bryant. Dr. John Bryant, what an absolute honor and pleasure for me to have the opportunity to talk to one of my great friends, one of my incredible colleagues, and one of the most thoughtful leaders I know. Welcome to the Ed Leader Podcast.
Thank you so very much for having me, Dr. Jackson. It's an honor and a privilege on my end, my friend. So thanks for giving me the space and look forward to the conversation today.
Absolutely. I tell you what, John, I've just been so very fascinated by you and by your career, and even more so by the conversations that we've had over the years. Dr. Bryant and I have been in professional development together, and the executive director of the North Carolina School Superintendents Association, Jack Hoke, a former guest on the Ed Leader Podcast, had the wherewithal to place me in Dr. Bryant's group so I could learn from Dr. Bryant. I am sure that's the reason he did that, because he knew I needed that time together. And so
Was it that, or as he said, these are two guys that are bound to get in trouble, so I might as well put them together and we can deal with it at that time?
I believe we call that as preferential seating in the accommodations.
You're exactly right. Well, I'm glad to be preferentialed with you. Yes, sir.
There you go. Well, we really did have just some, and have had and continue to have some phenomenal conversations. And so I'm looking forward to our time together. But as we kind of get into our conversation, how about sharing with our listeners a little bit about your work, about the district you serve, and as whatever you'd like to share about what has brought you into this moment in your career.
Absolutely. And I think just as you mentioned, those of us that are career educators, we talk about what that space has been like. And so from work in the classroom to work at the school level as an administrator all the way through district leadership, I've been fortunate for the last 16 years to be serving here in Henderson County, and most recently over the last several as the superintendent. And while those most recent years have been among the most challenging in education, I think they also have presented one of the most interesting opportunities to see the way that our students and our staff especially will be shaped by this grit moving forward. And to your point, the conversations that we've had have really just invited this space that says, yeah, it's been difficult, but we've been hardened, and the resolve and the resilience that's showing here is something that's equally exciting in the educational space. Think about how we do that work. And so in the last several years, as an educator and a lifetime servant in public education, I think we're looking at where we will go from here and get pretty excited about the kind of ways in which our students and our staff have really developed skills that they could never have imagined.
And thank you for saying that. That's the perfect segue to what I really want to think with you about today. And that is, you were mentioning our conversation about grit and resiliency and all that our students have been working through and our staff members have been working through. And in that conversation, I think you and I came to a very similar thought almost simultaneously, and one that clearly you had been thinking about. And that is the end result of staff members and students going through all that we've been going through and what that may create. And in our conversation, we talked about that really there's the possibility for the return of the greatest generation. And so kind of ground that conversation or provide foundation for that conversation. If you're not familiar, when we refer to the greatest generation, American journalist Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. And I'm going to read from that just very briefly, but he argues that the World War II generation's perseverance through difficult times is a testament to their extraordinary character. Their remarkable actions during times of war and peace ultimately made the United States a better place in which to live. They were born and raised in a tumultuous era marked by war and economic depression. They lived in 1918 through 1920 through the deadly Spanish flu pandemic. They also experienced much of their youth with rapid technology innovation like radio, television, and the automobile, amidst growing levels of worldwide income inequality and a soaring economy. And so as we talk about what was happening in this greatest generation, the parallels with what's happening today are astounding, particularly as we start thinking about World War II. And here we are in the midst of Russia invading Ukraine and what that means for every country in the entire world. And then, of course, they went through the Spanish flu pandemic, and we hope to be on the heels of the COVID pandemic. And so as you think about all of that and the teachers and staff members who are working through that, what is that creating in them, or what do you hope that's creating in them?
Yeah, I love that you quoted that directly, because I think it's so powerful to recognize the difference between real-time experience and experience that's in the rear view mirror. And so, you go to that greatest generation, this generation that we uphold, that we lift, that we recognize almost inspirationally to what they were. But at the time, I'm sure nobody's going through the Spanish flu and thinking like, you know what, we're going to be the greatest, so don't worry. And don't worry about these wars that we're experiencing and sending off our teenagers to storm the beaches in Normandy. In fact, we carry the burdens in real time and they become badges of honor later. And when I think about our current generation, those burdens have been real. Just as you said, the COVID impact, the way in which technology is racing in its acceleration, the way in which our global economies are fractured at times, what's taking place in the Ukraine today. And no one is experiencing that or what we've experienced in public education and saying, hey, this is going to make us better people. Or like we're literally in survival mode through so much of this. But it is that hopefulness that comes from what we've seen in generations previously that said, no, this steeled them to be stronger than maybe any previous generation, that they helped to be inspirations to their families, that they transform the fabric of our country. And what gets me really excited is when I think about a 5-year-old who's had to experience public education only during the COVID era. That's a 7-year-old now who is going to change the world because of who they are going to be, what they've had to experience, what they've had to deal with. And we realize you've got to be patient with that flower blooming. You can't expect it the day after, our numbers go down, or the day after face coverings come off, or otherwise. And so listening to that writing actually just gives me a ton of optimism for future generations, and especially those that we've stood alongside during this period of time. Because again, that burden that we have carried will often become that badge of honor and that badge of sacrifice later.
I tell you, John, there's a reason that when I listen to you speak, it resonates within me. And that's because I truly believe that part of leadership is to be purveyors of hope,
right?
To cast a vision of a better day, of a place we're headed to, a brighter future, opportunities unlimited. And if we're not careful, if no one's doing that, then we can all be mired in the morass. We can all be lost in the darkness, but the light has to be shown. And as leaders, who better, who else than the leader to say, this is possible. And so as you and I began to have these conversations about what could be, what is the potential now, because of what we've had to learn as we went through this. And so let's kind of break it down a little bit and work into what are, or how are teachers and staff members changed by the experiences they've had the last 2 years. What can they now do better? Or what are they more attentive to? I mean, what are your thoughts around who we are as a profession today that we may not have been 2 years ago?
Yeah, and I love that offering of, purveyors of hope, because much like the lighthouses in the background of your screen right now, it is what we shine light on and who we shine light for that becomes so very important. And I believe what has happened is we have seen the spaces of public education broken down to their most fundamental, and at times rebuilt in really beautiful ways. We have been forced to be innovative in ways that we never were before. We're often guilty of being a little bit like a battleship, so difficult to turn around, but this very powerful entity that is public education moving forward. And during these most recent 24 months, there have been times when we had to create what had never existed before, systems of learning and opportunities for instruction that no one was trained for, no one had imagined that they would deal with. And if we had to transition to these fully remote environments and support students on screens and make sure that we were reaching those learning objectives, it would have taken us decades to do what many of us did in just weeks, right? The way in which we fundamentally changed that. But the other thing was, I think we became real experts, and this is one of the real takeaways. We talk about differentiation, but nothing was illustrative about differentiated learning and learning opportunities than completely transforming how I had to connect with every individual student when they aren't just sitting in front of me. And we've seen so many of our educators come back to classrooms much more equipped to serve the individual student in powerful, meaningful, and transformative ways, because they connected to that so differently during these periods of remote instruction or face-to-face instruction or hybrid instruction, or the jumps that we've had to do in that space. And so I think we really have been granted a level of courage to do and try things that maybe we would have never done and tried before. We have instructional practices that never existed in public education that are now fundamentally part of who we are. And I'm sure you see that all the time. But we also have students that develop skills literally on the fly, and it was proof that they could do it. When you put a bunch of middle school students on a Chromebook and you say to them, hey, we need you to be in this space for 5, 6, maybe even 7 hours a day and learn how to utilize that space to maximize your own academic development and progress and work functionally with other people. Those were not skills that they had before this period started. And so I think what we've seen is real opportunity to demonstrate having the courage to be innovative and thoughtful about that, but being so individually directed toward student learning outcomes. Those are pieces that I think, have made us all better and are now going to simply be part of the fabric of our education systems.
I absolutely agree. And, as you were talking, I was really thinking about the parallel back to the original greatest generation, which is during World War II, when all of the men went to war, the factories needed to continue to operate, and there were things that had to be done. And so for the first time in large measure, women joined the workforce and had opportunities they had never had before, and continued after the war was over, and that became our way of life, and we were better for it. But had there not been this event, World War II, it might have taken generations or decades for us to get to a point where we were comfortable changing culturally to allow women to work outside of the home in great number. And so in this moment, as you shared, particularly when we think about teachers becoming comfortable teaching in a digital environment, teachers who had been teaching for quite a while would have absolutely put their foot down, thrown up the walls and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I know this works, what I'm doing today, and I'm going to stay right here. But they couldn't do that because of the pandemic, because children were at home or they were at home. And so they had to change. And so that parallel continues to just really kind of jump off to me. And so it does provide hope for me, which is kind of circling back to what you said earlier, in that looking back, looking into the rearview mirror and seeing what came about because the greatest generation went through the trials and tribulations. Early on, they did all the things they were able to accomplish. It's my feeling that, like you and your belief, our students, our staff members, particularly our staff members in this moment, it's my feeling that our staff members really are now equipped with skills they didn't have, with understanding they didn't have, with belief in themselves they didn't have, to really continue to grow and change in powerful ways.
And I think, what you're saying there is so profound, because just as you know, we were teaching young people about what to do when you don't know what to do, which is really like fundamentally the part of education that's so important, that our students were watching educators who had been professionally trained, many of whom had been doing the job, as you said, for their entire careers, who now had no frame of reference for what to do. They were having to create and fail and have the courage to innovate, all in real time. That is super scary. But we recognized that what we were, the refrain internally was, we're going to teach children more about who we are than any content or curriculum standards by how we behave and what we do during this time. And that doesn't mean that it's not incredibly difficult. And that doesn't mean that it's not incredibly exhausting. And that doesn't mean that it won't come without the gnashing of teeth and tears at times, because there was no script for this. There was no clear path for this. But what we were showing them was, you answer the bell. You answer the bell because that's what needs to be done right now. That's what needs to happen. And from a 5-year-old to an 18-year-old, they were seeing these teachers who they were leaning on to be stabilizing forces in their lives do exactly that, saying, I don't know, or we're going to try this for the first time, or I'm going to give this the opportunity, but my commitment to you is unwavering. My commitment to you and your learning and doing the best we can in this space is what we're going to do. And that is such a powerful lesson, because, again, if we're looking back at the greatest generation, when young men and women were arriving at a factory or showing up because they were drafted or caring for a family member because they were sick, they weren't necessarily saying, hey, I'm doing this because I feel confident and I know how, and this is exactly what I expected my life to be. They did it because it was what was necessary at the time, because they met that challenge. And then in many cases, as we've seen in classrooms and in families and in homes, they exceeded that expectation because they were fully present in that space. And it's so exciting to think about the way in which that has transformed hearts and minds, and certainly transformed the systems that support education because of what we've been through together.
There's no question. And you're exactly right. Often I've heard, and I'm sure you have, the stories from either the student perspective or the teacher perspective, where the teacher was online in a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet meeting with students who were at home across the district, and literally saying, I'm not really sure if this is the button I need to push, but I'm going to push it. And if I hang up on all of you, I'll call you all back, right?
That's right.
that willingness to courageously fail forward. I'm going to try this, and as a learner, I'm going to try to grow. And then to see our teachers try things like creating videos to teach with, all the things they did that they didn't know that they could do but had to do, is certainly a point of pride in our profession, I think, and an opportunity where we wouldn't have wanted to go through all we've been through. But I think we will be able to look back and put a little gold star on this moment and say, look at what we were able to do. And look how we answered the bell, to your point. And so it's just so exciting to think about that, and then to think, now what? Now what's going to get right?
Right. In that whole fail forward concept, we talk about it educationally, but it requires a tremendous amount of self-efficacy to truly do that, to really be able to say, all right, yeah, failure is first attempt in learning. We have to know that it's okay to do that forward, and then to show our students that that's okay. But it's one of the things that as educators, historically, we've resisted the most, because we want to be the ones that know what's going on, right? You don't develop a lesson plan with the intent of it not working. But to your point, we had to do that. We had to do that in real time, and we had to show our students that. And I think we are able to have different dialogues with them because of that shared experience and that shared work over this most recent period. And I believe it certainly has made us better. Uncomfortable as it may have been, it's like working out. You may not like it. It may hurt. You may not want to get up. But that pain, that stretch has been about growing us and improving us.
No question. No question. Well, I want to kind of pivot in our conversation to the other side of the screen, as it were. So we've been talking about the impact of all we've been through in the pandemic and all the else that's been going on our staff and our teachers. But I'd like us to think for a few moments about our students. You referenced earlier the 5-year-old who's now a 7-year-old whose foundational years weren't in the schoolhouse. Certainly today in our district, we are seeing behaviors in 9th grade that we would have never seen in high school, but we recognize that our 9th graders didn't have a normal middle school year. And so there's all kinds of ways that's playing out. But what have you seen, or what do you see as the impact of all we've been through on our students going forward?
Yeah, I think that impact is real. As you said, one of the things I think we can all be guilty of is having expectations based on a status quo that never existed. Use the 9th grader as an example. We think of all 9th graders as all having had this requisite experience from elementary school through middle school. And if it had been the traditional one, the stable one, the one absent COVID, then you might say, I'm not sure why we're seeing these types of things. But what we have to do is go back to what we do fundamentally as teachers, and that is meet students where they are, whether that be a literacy skill or a math skill or a behavioral skill, or even just an experiential space, that we acknowledge that we can't just assume that because you're a certain age or you're in a certain grade, that your experience has been consistent with a traditional one, because that's not been the case for anybody. And when you think about what every school system has looked like, what every home environment was like, we talked a lot with our folks about what the individual student learning experience was like when we were all fully remote. It was so disparate based on the situation for your family or the situation for your parents and where they were working and where you lived and what resources were available to you. And of course, school systems did everything that they could do to bridge and support those gaps, to provide those structures and supports in place. But I think we just have to have some honest conversations with our students about where they are. Where are you? Where do you assess yourself in these particular skills? What are the challenges? And you've heard teachers say it, and I have too, and parents really have even been recently sharing this with me. It's that recalibration of social connections, because the periods of time where we've been isolated, because the periods of time where we said, hey, no, let's stay separate from each other. I didn't have that full connectivity, and maybe even I've lost some of that development, that we just have to be very conscious of recalibrating as human beings, that we are connecting to each other, determining what those individual needs are, and really being responsive to the fact that no one experienced these last 2 years in the same way. We may think it was the same because the same global condition exists, but every individual experience was different.
No question. And that's such a powerful aha, and one that is borne out in our school system data. And so as we look at state assessments from last year, we understand they have a caveat because they were pandemic state assessments, but we can look across those and pick out our schools with the highest level of poverty based on what we're seeing in our growth data. The schools with more poverty or more challenges didn't have the same growth because we understand the students didn't have the same resources or the same support structures in place. And so it really starts to beg that conversation around equitable resourcing of our schools and of our educators, which could be a whole other conversation for us. But I do think that as a result of the challenges that our students have gone through, that it has helped prepare them moving forward. And you referenced a bit of what we've heard a lot from Sam Houston. Sam Houston also is a former guest on the podcast for our listeners, but he's one of those retired superintendents who we jokingly say would be on the Mount Rushmore of superintendents in the state of North Carolina.
Yes, he would.
Has said to you and I in our group many times that what we want from our students is we want to create in them independent versus dependent students, thoughtful versus thoughtless students, students who need to know what to do when they don't know what to do, which goes right back to what you said. And so I wonder, as you think about, as we want students to grow into independent versus dependent and thoughtful versus thoughtless and knowing what to do when they don't know what to do, how has this kind of helped them along that pathway, or has it?
I think we'll see that bear itself out. I believe we will have a lot to do with that framework by whether or not we continue to define the student experience, especially over the recent period, through a deficit mindset. I and so many others, I'm sure yourself included, really have struggled with this concept, this language of learning loss, as if everything was normal and these gaps in everybody's individual education were within our control. That actually starts from a place of comparability that has not really ever made sense to me. What we have to do is not say, oh, yes, I'm going to compare where this third grader is right now to a third grader in 2019. That actually is a thoughtless comparison.
Yes, it is.
And so, as you're saying, I think to teach kids to be thoughtful, to be independent thinkers, we have to be very honest with them about what the space is right now and what the targets and the goals are right now. And that is directly related to who you are right now. You wouldn't compare me. Let's just say, for example, I'm getting some kind of physical examination and you say, oh, well, we picked a 45-year-old from 3 years ago and we're going to compare you to him. And then you're going to define success only through that individual. No, you would assess where I am right now. And then you would build a path toward better physical health, better, diet, exercise, or whatever, based on where I was at that time. And that's just I think, a critical piece of that. Knowing what to do when you don't know what to do is to acknowledge what we have experienced over this last period of time as we've celebrated, our teachers and our staff and their innovation in that space. That independence comes from saying it's okay to not know, but it's not okay to not be reflective and thoughtful and engaged in what those spaces are. And most importantly, that we would individualize that so that students felt supported and not, quote, constantly behind. And that does scare me. I will just say with you, Dr. Jackson, when we talk, if every child feels like they're failing because they're not meeting some metric that was defined before these most recent experiences, then I think we're failing our kids. We just have to be very clear and honest with parents and families and students about where they are individually and make sure that growth occurs. And that is recognizing that are we moving forward from where we were yesterday? And if that's the case, then the root goals of education are being met.
No question. And again, I just love spending time thinking with you because you are so very thoughtful. And speaking of being thoughtful and reflective, as we kind of wind our conversation to a close, and as I have the opportunity to go from this moment to spend a lot of time reflecting on what you just said, because I promise you I will, as I always do. I do want to recognize and congratulate you as my friend on an upcoming new adventure for you. I was so excited for you as I read about your new opportunity to continue to serve in a bright new way. Share with us what lies ahead for you.
Well, thank you for those kind words, and certainly the encouragement and support mean the world to me. Very, very fortunate to be able to be stepping into a new role of leadership in our community on July 1st of this year. We'll actually be serving as a vice president for workforce development and community affairs with Party UNC Healthcare here in our continued community. It's baffling to me that I have served in public education for nearly 25 years. It's hard to believe that when I was graduating from college that moment would ever come. But I have just such a passion and heart for public service and service to our community and service to our parents, our families, our children, and the generations of opportunities associated with that. And I'm really thrilled to continue that work, this public education service, in helping to fundamentally support healthcare and a healthcare industry. And you think about what the men and women in healthcare have done over the last several years. You talk about the greatest generation. You talk about men and women who have been truly the heroes of this period of time, who have shown up to work and faced such challenges. It's a real exciting opportunity to deeply carry this passion that I have for public education and really marry that to service in healthcare within our own community. So looking forward to that opportunity.
I'm so excited for you. And as I think about the many ways that the adventure you're going to is similar to the adventure you've been on, I know that your experience and your expertise and your passion and your talent will serve you well. And as you have the opportunity to continue to deepen the partnership and relationships that exist between the hospital and healthcare and the education system, I know that students, families, and the community will be better for it. And we're better for it for your service. And I'm better for it for having had the opportunity to have been your colleague and the ongoing, continuing opportunity to be your friend. Dr. John Bryant, you are the man. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate you, brother.
Hey, bro, listen, you're much too kind, but I need you to help start my day. I need that kind of encouragement every day. I'm gonna record that part of it. I'm gonna say, Dr. Jackson, give me some words of wisdom and encouragement today. To have a colleague such as yourself, the honor is all mine. Thank you for making the space to be here today, and always look forward to listening to you in the future and hope to get to join you again.
Excellent. Thank you, my friend. Take care.
My pleasure.
I hope that you enjoyed our conversation today with Dr. Bryant. We are purveyors of hope as we provide hope for what will be and continue to serve our students, teachers, staff, families, and the community. I hope you also see the possibilities of the reemergence, the return of the greatest generation. Thank you for spending time with me today, and thank you for all you do for every student, every teacher, and every staff member. You are making a difference. If no one else has told you, I want you to know that I believe in you. Good day.
Thank you for listening to the Ed Leader Podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and consider leaving a review with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts so that we may continue to grow the Ed Leader community. We hope that you have enjoyed your time with Dr. Jackson. Until next time.